Imagine the deafening roar of a sold-out Paris stadium, the city of lights glowing as 7 boys give the performance of a lifetime. But wait, a massive plot twist hits the VIP section. Who would have thought the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and First Lady Brigitte Macron would be right there vibing in the crowd? How did the biggest boy band on the planet react when spotting the highest state dignitaries at their show? Did they freeze, panic, or just keep slaying? Grab your snacks because we are diving into the most epic, unfiltered, and mind-blowing behind-the-scenes moments ever. Are you ready to see what really happens when political royalty meets modern music legends? Let's go! Number 7. RM, the leader's composure, a diplomatic stance. When you're the leader of the biggest musical phenomenon on the planet, your brain is hardwired to process a million things per second. But spotting the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and First Lady Brigitte Macron sitting right there in the VIP section of your Paris tour, that is a whole different level of mental gymnastics that even Kim Namjoon, the genius leader of BTS, had to take a split second to digest. Let's rewind a bit to set the scene perfectly for you, because context is absolutely everything in this epic tale of cultural collision and unprecedented global influence. You have to picture the sheer magnitude of the venue. The Stade de France was pulsating with an energy that was thick, suffocatingly intense, and completely intoxicating. It was a bizarre yet electrifying mix of tens of thousands of screaming, passionate fans and the sudden heavy realization that the highest echelons of European political power were in the building, creating a vibe that you rarely, if ever, see in a standard pop concert. Now truly imagine being RM in that exact fleeting moment. You are standing on stage, the blinding, colorful LED lights hitting your face, the heavy bass of the music vibrating deep through your chest cavity, and as you casually scan the crowd to connect with the audience like you always do, your eyes suddenly lock on to the heavily guarded VIP section. There he is, the President of the French Republic, flanked by a sea of stern-faced dignitaries and security details, alongside the First Lady, watching your every single move with keen, undeniable interest. For a regular artist, this unexpected sight might trigger a sudden wave of panic, a forgotten lyric, or a momentary freeze in choreography. But we are talking about RM, a man who has eloquently spoken at the United Nations General Assembly, a man who has casually conversed with global leaders at the White House. Yet even with all that heavy diplomatic experience under his belt, the sheer surrealism of performing a high-energy, unapologetically Korean K-pop track in front of the French head of state is enough to make anyone's heart skip a beat. What makes RM's reaction so intensely captivating and worthy of this list is not a dramatic gasp or an exaggerated shocked expression, but rather the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his entire commanding aura. If you look closely at the footage, his posture straightened just a fraction more, pushing his shoulders back as if physically bearing the weight of the historical moment. His rap delivery became slightly sharper, biting into every syllable with renewed aggression, and his eyes, usually filled with that warm, soft, inclusive affection for Army, took on a piercing, calculated intensity of a true, seasoned cultural ambassador. You have to deeply understand the immense pressure riding on his broad shoulders at that exact second. BTS was no longer just representing themselves or big hit entertainment. They were actively carrying the entire pride, history, and modern soft power of South Korea on their backs in front of one of Europe's most powerful leaders. They were the living, breathing embodiment of the Hallyu wave, proving right there in the heart of Europe that South Korean art, language, and culture command absolute respect at the highest possible levels of global governance. RM, with his reported genius IQ, knew exactly what this meant on a macro scale. He knew that the clips of this specific performance would be analyzed, dissected, and discussed not just by adoring fans on social media, but by cultural critics, politicians, sociologists, and historians for decades to come.
Every lyric he spat in his native tongue, every sharp gesture he made was a profound political and cultural statement. Let's not forget the sheer magnitude of performing in Paris, a city historically known as the global epicenter of art, revolution, and culture. For centuries, Paris has been the ultimate gatekeeper of high art, often turning a critical, elitist eye toward foreign pop culture phenomena. Yet here was BTS, tearing down those invisible walls of cultural elitism with every single beat. RM, being an avid lover of art and history himself, a man who spends his limited free time wandering through the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, surely felt the poetic justice of this moment. He was standing in the cultural capital of the world, making the French political elite vibe to Korean lyrics. The First Lady, Brigitte Macron, known for her sharp intellect and keen interest in modern pop culture, was visibly captivated, proving that music transcends all boundaries of age, language, and geopolitical borders. You could see in RM's meticulously controlled breathing, in the way he seamlessly transitioned from aggressive rap verses to smooth melodic hooks, that he was hyper-aware of this cross-cultural victory. He wasn't just a performer, he was a maestro orchestrating a historic summit between East and West. He navigated the complex choreography with an elegant ferocity, making absolutely sure that his stage presence was respectful, yet undeniably overwhelmingly dominant. Behind that signature dimpled smile and smooth, charismatic stage persona, RM was undoubtedly internally calculating the monumental shift in K-pop's global standing that this very moment represented. Just reflect on their journey for a second. Merely a few years prior, they were an unknown group from a nearly bankrupt agency, handing out flyers on the sun-baked streets of Los Angeles, practically begging random strangers to come to their free concert. And now, the president of a G7 nation is taking time out of his impossibly busy, world-governing schedule to sit in a stadium and watch them perform live. It's a cinematic, deeply emotional underdog story that you could not write better if you tried, an arc that feels almost fictional in its grandiosity. The effortlessly casual way RM acknowledged the VIPs without ever breaking the intense flow of the performance was an absolute masterclass in professionalism and quiet confidence. He didn't overly pander, he didn't awkwardly bow mid-song or break character. He simply delivered pure, unadulterated excellence, proving unequivocally that BTS belongs in these prestigious spaces just as much as any classical European orchestra or traditional state diplomat. The way he maintained eye contact with the massive crowd, occasionally sweeping his gaze over the presidential box, showcased a level of confidence that takes decades for seasoned politicians to master. Yet here was a young man from Ilsan doing it effortlessly. This is what separates BTS from the rest. They don't shrink in the face of immense power. They rise to meet it with an undeniable gravitational pull of their own. Every bead of sweat, every sharp exhale into the microphone was a testament to the thousands of hours of grueling practice that brought them to this exact, unbelievable pinnacle of success. This wasn't just a regular concert stop for him anymore. It was a high-stakes diplomatic mission, flawlessly executed through the mediums of hip-hop, pop, and synchronized dance. The emotional weight of this realization is genuinely staggering when you take a step back and truly think about it. The young leader who once lay awake in a cramped, humid dorm room, doubting if his group would even survive their debut year in a cutthroat, unforgiving industry, was now holding the undivided attention of one of the most powerful and influential men in the Western Hemisphere. It is this incredible, mind-bending juxtaposition of gritty, street-smart hip-hop and high-society political diplomacy that makes RM's reaction to President Macron and the First Lady so utterly legendary and unforgettable. He owned the stage, he owned the moment, and he subtly reminded the entire world that BTS is not just a passing musical trend or a temporary teenage craze, but a permanent, formidable cultural force that commands the respect and attention of presidents and world leaders alike.
Number 6. Jin, the worldwide handsome confidence. Breaking the ice. When you talk about Kim Seok-jin, you are not just discussing a globally renowned vocalist, you are delving into the psyche of a man whose absolute, unbreakable confidence has become a cultural touchstone in its own right. And when faced with the President of France sitting right there in the VIP section of the Stade de France, Jin did exactly what he does best. He completely owned the space with a regal elegance that seemed almost impossibly natural. Picture this exact heart-stopping scenario unfolding in real time under the Parisian night sky, a city famous for its unapologetic appreciation of beauty, fashion, and high art, where the blinding stadium lights are cutting through the thick, smoky air of the concert venue and the energy is practically vibrating off the walls. Now truly imagine being Jin, standing incredibly tall with those famous broad shoulders looking out into an endless, chaotic sea of screaming armies, only to have your eyes land squarely on Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron, two of the most influential political figures in the entire Western world, watching your performance with intense, unblinking fascination. For a split second, a normal person's brain would probably short-circuit out of sheer, overwhelming panic. I mean, how do you even begin to actively process the fact that the actual French head of state is deeply analyzing your complex choreography and listening intently to your raw, live vocals? Did he flinch under the heavy, scrutinizing weight of those incredibly powerful eyes? Absolutely not. In fact, the exact moment he consciously registered their presence, Jin seemed to instantly level up, radiating an even brighter, more magnetic aura that instantly commanded the undivided attention of everyone in the massive arena. It is absolutely crucial to understand the fascinating, complex duality of Jin's character to fully grasp the sheer magnitude of this historical moment, because on the surface, he's the playful, flying, kiss-throwing, worldwide handsome who constantly breaks the ice with his signature dad jokes and infectious laughter. But beneath that incredibly charming exterior lies a fiercely dedicated artist, a man who built his vocal and dance skills from the absolute ground up through thousands upon thousands of hours of grueling, bone-aching practice. When he made direct eye contact with the prestigious presidential box, you could almost physically see that underlying razor-sharp professionalism snap to the absolute forefront of his expression. He didn't break character to do a stiff formal bow mid-song, nor did he let his voice waver in the slightest. Instead, he leaned entirely into his vital role as the visual and vocal powerhouse of the group, projecting his crystal-clear silver voice into the microphone with a staggering, unshakable stability that left absolutely no doubt about exactly why BTS is perched at the very pinnacle of the global music industry. Just think about the profound cultural implications of this exact fleeting interaction for a moment. Here is a South Korean man singing passionately in his native language, showcasing a distinctly Asian standard of beauty and charisma directly to the French political elite, essentially flipping the traditional, centuries-old Eurocentric script of global soft power completely upside down in real time. The First Lady, Brigitte Macron, who has openly and consistently shown her deep appreciation for the arts and contemporary youth culture, must have been utterly captivated by the sheer, unadulterated confidence radiating from the stage. How can anyone not be entranced? Jin moved through the intricate, demanding choreography with a fluid, almost aristocratic grace, hitting those soaring, physically impossible high notes in tracks like Epiphany or Fake Love with a passionate intensity that echoed into the very souls of the massive audience, all while knowing that the highest diplomatic representatives of France were bearing witness to his group's monumental triumph. You have to wonder, what was really going through his mind in those silent, fleeting seconds of realization? Was he reflecting on those desperate, uncertain early days in a cramped, humid dorm room in Seoul, where he used to cook cheap meals for the younger members and quietly worry deep into the night about whether their small, struggling company would even survive the year? Did the sheer, unbelievable absurdity of the current situation bring a hidden, triumphant smile to his lips as he executed a flawless dance break under the watchful eyes of a G7 leader? What makes Jin's reaction so incredibly captivating in this immensely high-stakes environment is his uncanny, almost supernatural ability to make the extraordinary feel completely, effortlessly normal. He didn't let the daunting presence of a world leader intimidate him or diminish his legendary stage presence. If anything, he boldly used it as fuel, standing a little taller, projecting his powerful voice a little louder, and letting his undeniable charm wash over the stadium like a massive tidal wave of pure charisma. The true beauty of this specific moment lies not in an overly dramatic gesture or a sudden change in routine, but in the quiet, powerful assertion of self-worth and belonging. By simply being his most authentic, supremely confident self, Jin was silently communicating to the French president and the entire watching world that BTS had rightfully earned their place on this massive global stage, not through sheer luck or a passing trend, but through undeniable talent, relentless hard work, and a magnetic appeal that effortlessly transcends all boundaries of language, geography, and political ideology. It is deeply inspiring when you really sit down and analyze it, because it perfectly encapsulates the ultimate empowering message of BTS: loving yourself and having the unshakable confidence to stand your ground no matter who is watching or judging. The way he effortlessly balanced his natural, playful warmth with a commanding, almost regal stage presence was a true masterclass in live entertainment, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can be both deeply respectful of a momentous occasion and entirely, unapologetically yourself. Even when he smoothly shot one of his legendary signature flying kisses towards the general direction of the massive crowd, capturing the hearts of tens of thousands in a single fluid motion, it felt like a universal gesture of goodwill and cultural diplomacy that even a seasoned, stoic politician could appreciate and respect. This wasn't just a typical pop star trying to show off for the cameras. This was a seasoned, masterful cultural ambassador operating at the absolute peak of his incredible powers, flawlessly bridging the massive gap between South Korean pop culture and European high society, with nothing more than a microphone and an unbreakable sense of self-belief. When the final resonant notes rang out and the blinding stadium lights flared, illuminating the sheer, awe-inspiring scale of the monumental event, Jin's calm, composed, and radiant demeanor in front of the political elite left a lasting, indelible mark on everyone lucky enough to be watching. It forces us all to ask ourselves a very challenging question. If Kim Seok-jin can stand before a world leader and remain so brilliantly, flawlessly confident in his own skin, what is stopping the rest of us from owning our own moments of triumph with that exact same level of unapologetic grace?
Number 5. Suga, the unfazed maestro, a quietly savage nod. When you closely examine the intricate, fascinating dynamics of BTS, there was one member who consistently serves as the unshakable, grounding anchor of the group amidst any storm of chaos, and that is absolutely Min Yoongi, universally known to the world as Suga, whose reaction to spotting the French president and First Lady in the sprawling VIP section was a masterclass in pure, unadulterated swagger and quiet, devastating dominance. To truly grasp the gravity of this surreal interaction, you have to mentally place yourself right there in the suffocatingly thick, electrifying atmosphere of the Stade de France, a colossal architectural marvel vibrating intensely under the sheer, deafening volume of tens of thousands of screaming fans. The heavy, thumping bass is rattling the steel beams of the stadium, the blinding pyrotechnics are shooting into the dark Parisian sky, and right in the middle of this sensory overload, perched in the heavily fortified presidential box, are Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron, keenly observing the highest echelon of South Korean musical royalty. Now imagine being Suga in that exact split-second moment.
For a man whose entire persona is built upon a foundation of stoic, razor-sharp observation and an almost feline-like calmness, the sudden sight of Western political elite casually watching his intensely aggressive rap performance did not trigger a dramatic gasp, a missed beat, or even the slightest widening of his famously sharp, discerning eyes. Instead, Suga did what only Suga could possibly do in a situation that would normally paralyze an ordinary artist with debilitating stage fright. He simply acknowledged their towering presence with a nearly imperceptible, supremely confident tilt of his head, subtly tightening his grip on the microphone before launching into his intricate, tongue-twisting verses with an even deadlier, more venomous precision than before. You have to understand that this is a man who operates on a completely different psychological wavelength than the rest of the entertainment industry. He is a fiercely independent, self-made producer and lyricist who literally clawed his way up from the unforgiving, gritty underground hip-hop scene of Daegu, a place where he used to desperately sell his meticulously crafted beats just to afford a single, cheap bowl of noodles, often having to choose between eating dinner or taking the bus home. Try to fully process that mind-bending cinematic juxtaposition for a moment. The very same young man who once battled agonizing depression, crushing poverty, and a society that aggressively told him his musical dreams were nothing more than a foolish, impossible delusion, was now standing on one of the most prestigious, culturally significant stages in all of Europe, aggressively spitting raw, emotionally charged Korean syllables, while the actual sitting president of the French Republic watched in undivided attention. The sheer, intoxicating poetic justice of that reality is enough to bring tears to the eyes of anyone who truly understands his agonizing journey. When Suga made brief, piercing eye contact with the presidential box, he wasn't looking at them as untouchable rulers of a foreign land. He was looking at them as guests in his house, completely owning the narrative and dictating the fierce energy of the stadium with a casual flick of his wrist. It is in these incredibly rare, high-stakes moments that Suga's legendary AGD persona bleeds seamlessly into his BTS performances, radiating an aura of untouchable, savage confidence that silently commands absolute respect from everyone in the room, regardless of their political title, net worth, or social standing. He didn't feel the sudden, desperate need to overly impress the Macrons with exaggerated gestures or forced smiles, because Min Yoongi intimately knows the immeasurable, hard-earned value of his own art, and he knows that his raw, unfiltered authenticity is far more powerful than any rehearsed diplomatic pleasantry could ever be. As he furiously paced across the massive stage, his dark hair damp with sweat under the relentless glare of the stadium spotlights, delivering the famously ferocious verses of tracks like Mic Drop or Outro End of Tier, the heavy, rhythmic syllables of his native tongue sliced cleanly through the thick Parisian air, completely obliterating any preconceived notions or invisible language barriers that might have existed in the minds of the European elite. The First Lady, known for her sharp intellect and deep appreciation of the arts, must have felt the visceral, undeniable passion radiating from this fiercely intense performer, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that true, raw emotion and musical genius are universally understood languages that require zero translation. What is truly mesmerizing about Suga's reaction is not what he overtly did, but rather what he decisively chose not to do. He refused to shrink, he refused to falter, and he absolutely refused to let the heavy, intimidating weight of political authority distract him from his ultimate mission of connecting deeply with the massive sea of armies who had waited years to see him shine. His internal monologue in that fleeting second must have been a fascinating blend of dry, sarcastic humor and profound, quiet triumph, perhaps acknowledging the sheer, hilarious absurdity of the universe, orchestrating a moment where a Daegu underground rapper is holding court for G7 leaders. This silent, powerful demonstration of self-assurance is precisely why millions of fans around the globe look up to him as the ultimate symbol of resilience and quiet strength. He teaches us that you do not need to be the loudest, most overly expressive person in the room to command absolute authority. You just need to be terrifically good at what you do, relentlessly authentic, and deeply grounded in your own unique journey.
as the final reverberating bass drop of his solo verse echoed through the massive venue, shaking the very foundations of the historic stadium. Suga's cool, calculated, and utterly unfazed demeanor left an indelible, deeply inspiring mark on the entire historical event, serving as a powerful, permanent reminder that true kings of the stage bow to absolutely no one when they are deeply immersed in their element. It forces every single one of us to pause and ask ourselves if a kid who started with absolutely nothing can look a world leader in the eye and casually deliver a rap verse with the confidence of a seasoned god. What incredible, impossible heights are we capable of reaching if we simply believe in our own undeniable worth? This mind-blowing, chill-inducing interaction will forever be etched in the glorious, ever-expanding history of BTS as the definitive moment when Suga proved that pure, unadulterated swag transcends all borders, leaving us completely breathless and burning with an intense, desperate curiosity to see exactly how the remaining members navigated this unbelievable, history-making scenario.
Number 4. J-Hope, the Radiant Commander's Precision, a dance of supreme diplomacy. When you talk about the sheer, unadulterated live performance power of BTS, you absolutely cannot have a conversation without immediately centering it on Jungkook, the man universally beloved as J-Hope, whose reaction to spotting the French president and First Lady was a breathtaking exhibition of pure, weaponized charisma and terrifyingly flawless professionalism. To truly grasp the astronomical weight of this specific, fleeting moment in Paris, you have to mentally transport yourself into the deafening, vibrating epicenter of the Stade de France, a massive architectural beast of a stadium that was practically trembling under the explosive kinetic energy of tens of thousands of screaming armies. Imagine the blinding, strobing stage lights violently cutting through the thick, smoky Parisian air, the heavy, heart-pounding bass of their hip-hop tracks echoing through the steel rafters, and right there, amidst this absolute sensory chaos, sits the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, and his incredibly culturally astute wife, Brigitte Macron, watching the absolute highest tier of South Korean performance art unfold before their very eyes. Now put yourself inside the mind of J-Hope at that exact heart-stopping second of realization. For a normal, everyday performer, realizing that the political ruler of a G7 nation is actively scrutinizing your dance moves might cause a sudden disastrous misstep, a tiny hesitation, or a total freeze in muscle memory. But we are not talking about a normal performer. We are talking about the legendary dance leader of BTS, a man who famously operates with the strict, unforgiving precision of a military commander on stage, famously dubbed Captain Jung by his own members for his terrifyingly sharp eye for detail. The absolute brilliance of J-Hope's reaction is that he didn't just survive this mind-bending realization, he actively weaponized it, completely transforming his already explosive energy into a mesmerizing, magnetic spectacle that physically commanded the attention of every single soul in that stadium, including the French head of state. You have to rewind and look at the deeply emotional, profoundly inspiring origins of Jungkook to fully appreciate the cinematic poetry of this moment. This is a man who started his journey as a humble underground street dancer in the small, distant city of Gwangju, battling in cramped, sweaty underground hip-hop circles with his crew, Neuron, purely for the raw, unyielding love of the dance. He was a kid who practiced until his knees bled, who spent countless agonizing nights sleeping on the cold wooden floor of the dance studio, relentlessly pushing his physical limits in the desperate, burning hope that one day his movements would mean something to the world. And now try to comprehend the staggering, almost unbelievable reality of his current situation. Those very same intricate, bone-breaking isolations and fluid, gravity-defying popping techniques that he perfected in the shadows of Gwangju were now being displayed on the most prestigious, culturally elite stage in Europe, directly capturing the undivided, fascinated attention of the French political elite.
When J-Hope's razor-sharp gaze swept across the sprawling VIP section and locked onto the presidential box, his signature blindingly bright heart-shaped smile didn't falter for a single solitary microsecond. Instead, it somehow grew even more radiant, morphing from a standard performance expression into a wildly confident, deeply knowing smirk of a man who knows exactly how incredibly talented he is. You could visually see the subtle but powerful shift in his kinetic energy. His popping became a fraction sharper, his footwork became impossibly faster, and his entire physical presence expanded to completely dominate the colossal stadium space. Brigitte Macron, a woman who was highly educated in the classical arts and known for her deep appreciation of modern cultural movements, must have been completely paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming technical mastery of his movements. J-Hope wasn't just doing choreography, he was actively narrating the story of South Korea's modern cultural renaissance through his body, flawlessly executing every single beat and rhythm with a terrifying robotic precision that leaves even the most seasoned, cynical dance critics absolutely speechless. This was a monumental, historic display of soft power at its absolute finest, and J-Hope was the spearhead, slicing effortlessly through centuries of deep-rooted European cultural elitism with a single, devastatingly perfect hip thrust and a blindingly charismatic wink. What is so deeply moving about this interaction is the fierce, unbreakable duality of J-Hope's character. On one hand, he is the literal sunshine of the group, a beacon of hope and joy who desperately wants to heal the world with his music, but on the other, he is a fiercely competitive, ruthlessly disciplined artist who demands absolute perfection from himself and his team. In that fleeting moment of locking eyes with the French dignitaries, you saw both of those sides seamlessly merge into one unstoppable force. He didn't offer a stiff, awkward, diplomatic wave or break the carefully constructed illusion of the concert. He just leaned completely into the heavy, intoxicating beat of the music, proving that the highest form of respect you can pay to a world leader who attends your show is to give them the absolute greatest, most jaw-dropping performance of their entire life. He completely shattered the invisible, intimidating barrier between the gritty, street-level roots of hip-hop and the sterile, highly polished world of global politics, forcing the French president to vibe to the rhythm of Korean culture. You can only imagine the wild, adrenaline-fueled thoughts racing through his brilliantly creative mind in that exact second. Was he remembering the times he almost quit the group before their debut, the tearful nights of uncertainty, the grueling physical pain of thousands of hours of repetitive practice? To stand there, bathing in the blinding golden lights of Paris, a city historically synonymous with the absolute peak of artistic achievement, and essentially force the political elite to acknowledge his genius, is a level of triumphant victory that most humans will never, ever experience in 100 lifetimes. This specific, awe-inspiring display of supreme confidence and flawless execution will forever remain a legendary testament to J-Hope's status as a generational talent, a performer so incredibly gifted and fiercely dedicated that the daunting, towering presence of a world leader doesn't intimidate him, but merely serves as just another audience member completely entranced by his gravitational pull. As the final explosive pyrotechnics lit up the Parisian night sky and the deafening cheers of armies shook the very foundation of the earth, J-Hope's absolutely flawless, unfazed dominance left a permanent, unforgettable mark on the history of global entertainment, leaving us completely paralyzed with amazement and desperately craving to know exactly how the remaining three members of this legendary septet handled this beautifully chaotic, world-colliding scenario.
Number 3. Jimin, the ethereal swan's gaze, a mesmerizing cultural spell. When we traverse the meticulously crafted, culturally transcendent landscape of BTS's live performances, there is an undisputed, gravity-defying epicenter of pure, visceral artistic emotion, and his name is Park Jimin, whose breathtaking reaction to the sudden realization that the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and the fiercely intellectual First Lady Brigitte Macron were sitting right there in the VIP section of the Stade de France was an absolute, undisputed masterclass in hypnotic, ethereal dominance. To fully process the sheer, mind-bending gravity of this exact historical moment, you have to completely immerse yourself in the intoxicating, emotionally charged atmosphere of the Parisian stadium, a colossal architectural marvel that was practically vibrating with the deafening, tear-filled screams of tens of thousands of passionate armies. The blinding stage lights were violently cutting through the thick, smoky air, creating a glowing halo effect around the members. And right in the crosshairs of this staggering sensory overload sat the absolute pinnacle of European political power, actively witnessing the most formidable display of South Korean soft power in modern history. Now, deeply imagine being Jimin in that fleeting, heart-stopping fraction of a second. For most ordinary artists, looking out into a chaotic, boundless sea of fans and suddenly locking eyes with the actual head of a G7 nation would trigger an immediate panicked spike of adrenaline, a rigidness in posture, or a desperate, entirely visible attempt to overcompensate for the overwhelming pressure. But Jimin is a fundamentally different breed of performer. He's a formally trained contemporary dancer, an artist who was historically the top student in the modern dance department at the prestigious Busan High School of Arts, a man whose entire physical being is hardwired to communicate the deepest, most complex human emotions through the meticulous, fluid articulation of his body. When his sharp, intensely captivating gaze swept over the stadium and recognized the French dignitaries, Jimin did not freeze or falter. Instead, he seemingly absorbed the immense crushing pressure of their presence and instantly transmuted it into a mesmerizing, magnetic aura that cast a profound, inescapable spell over the entire venue. You have to actively reflect on the fascinating, deeply poetic symmetry of this specific cultural collision to truly appreciate its legendary magnitude. Paris is universally revered as the global sanctuary of classical ballet, modern dance, and high art, a city whose historical theaters have birthed and nurtured the absolute greatest dancers the world has ever known. For Jimin to stand on that specific soil, effectively becoming the ultimate living bridge between the ancient, deeply respected traditions of contemporary dance and the explosive, fiercely modern energy of K-pop, and to do so under the scrutinizing, incredibly powerful gaze of the French president, is a cinematic triumph of unbelievable proportions. The First Lady, Brigitte Macron, who is widely known for her sharp cultural awareness and deep appreciation of fine arts, must have been utterly transfixed by the sheer, unadulterated grace of his movements. When Jimin performs, he doesn't just hit the choreographed beats, he essentially bends the very fabric of time and space around him, flawlessly transitioning from aggressive, bone-snapping hip-hop isolations in hard-hitting tracks like Mic Drop or Idol, to delicate, impossibly fluid contemporary leaps in emotional masterpieces like Black Swan or Fake Love that make him look completely untethered from the laws of gravity. In that split second of realization, his signature razor-sharp intensity sharpened even further, his eyes narrowing into that famous, fiercely alluring gaze that has practically brought millions of fans to their knees across the globe. He completely blurred the rigid, intimidating lines between political royalty and musical artistry, forcing the most powerful figures in the room to submit entirely to his narrative and his emotional wavelength. He didn't offer a stiff, subservient bow mid-performance or nervously look away to avoid eye contact. He held their attention with the quiet, terrifyingly beautiful confidence of a black swan that absolutely knows it owns the lake. What was genuinely going through his fiercely dedicated, endlessly critical mind in that exact silent moment?
Was he reflecting on the countless, agonizing nights he spent crying in empty, freezing dance studios in Seoul, pushing his physically exhausted body past the absolute breaking point, desperately trying to prove to himself and his skeptical company that he truly deserved to debut? The sheer emotional weight of his incredible journey from a self-doubting, passionately driven teenager in Busan to a global cultural titan mesmerizing the European elite in Paris is a cinematic triumph of unbelievable proportions. The First Lady Brigitte Macron, who is widely known for her sharp cultural awareness and deep appreciation of fine arts, must have been utterly transfixed by the sheer, unadulterated grace of his movements. When Jimin performs, he doesn't just hit the choreographed beats, he essentially bends the very fabric of time and space around him, flawlessly transitioning from aggressive, bone-snapping hip-hop isolations in hard-hitting tracks like Mic Drop or Idol, to delicate, impossibly fluid contemporary leaps in emotional masterpieces like Black Swan or Fake Love that make him look completely untethered from the laws of gravity. In that split second of realization, his signature razor-sharp intensity sharpened even further, his eyes narrowing into that famous, fiercely alluring gaze that has practically brought millions of fans to their knees across the globe. He completely blurred the rigid, intimidating lines between political royalty and musical artistry, forcing the most powerful figures in the room to submit entirely to his narrative and his emotional wavelength. He didn't offer a stiff, subservient bow mid-performance or nervously look away to avoid eye contact. He held their attention with the quiet, terrifyingly beautiful confidence of a black swan that absolutely knows it owns the lake. What was genuinely going through his fiercely dedicated, endlessly critical mind in that exact silent moment? Was he reflecting on the countless, agonizing nights he spent crying in empty, freezing dance studios in Seoul, pushing his physically exhausted body past the absolute breaking point, desperately trying to prove to himself and his skeptical company that he truly deserved to debut? The sheer emotional weight of his incredible journey from a self-doubting, passionately driven teenager in Busan to a global cultural titan mesmerizing the European elite in Paris is a cinematic triumph of unbelievable proportions. The First Lady Brigitte Macron, who is widely known for her sharp cultural awareness and deep appreciation of fine arts, must have been utterly transfixed by the sheer, unadulterated grace of his movements. When Jimin performs, he doesn't just hit the choreographed beats, he essentially bends the very fabric of time and space around him, flawlessly transitioning from aggressive, bone-snapping hip-hop isolations in hard-hitting tracks like Mic Drop or Idol, to delicate, impossibly fluid contemporary leaps in emotional masterpieces like Black Swan or Fake Love that make him look completely untethered from the laws of gravity. In that split second of realization, his signature razor-sharp intensity sharpened even further, his eyes narrowing into that famous, fiercely alluring gaze that has practically brought millions of fans to their knees across the globe. He completely blurred the rigid, intimidating lines between political royalty and musical artistry, forcing the most powerful figures in the room to submit entirely to his narrative and his emotional wavelength. He didn't offer a stiff, subservient bow mid-performance or nervously look away to avoid eye contact. He held their attention with the quiet, terrifyingly beautiful confidence of a black swan that absolutely knows it owns the lake. What was genuinely going through his fiercely dedicated, endlessly critical mind in that exact silent moment? Was he reflecting on the countless, agonizing nights he spent crying in empty, freezing dance studios in Seoul, pushing his physically exhausted body past the absolute breaking point, desperately trying to prove to himself and his skeptical company that he truly deserved to debut? The sheer emotional weight of his incredible journey from a self-doubting, passionately driven teenager in Busan to a global cultural titan mesmerizing the European elite in Paris is a cinematic triumph of unbelievable proportions. The First Lady Brigitte Macron, who is widely known for her sharp cultural awareness and deep appreciation of fine arts, must have been utterly transfixed by the sheer, unadulterated grace of his movements.
Number 2. V, the cinematic stare-down, a masterclass in charisma. When we completely immerse ourselves in the absolute depths of visual storytelling and pure, unadulterated stage magnetism within the legendary septet, we must immediately turn our intense, undivided focus to Kim Tae-young, known globally to millions as V, a man whose staggering reaction to spotting the French president and First Lady in the heavily guarded VIP section was nothing short of a breathtaking, real-time cinematic masterpiece. To truly comprehend the monumental, earth-shattering gravity of this specific interaction, you must mentally transport yourself directly into the suffocatingly electric, wildly pulsating heart of the Stade de France, a colossal architectural titan that was physically trembling under the deafening, tear-soaked screams of tens of thousands of deeply passionate fans. The blinding, multicolored stage lasers were violently slicing through the thick, hazy Parisian night sky. The heavy, echoing bass of their record-breaking tracks was rattling the very steel foundations of the arena. And right there, perfectly positioned in the crosshairs of this staggering sensory overload, sat Emmanuel and Brigitte Macron, actively witnessing the most formidable, historically significant display of South Korean soft power the European continent has ever seen. Now deeply and vividly imagine being V in that fleeting, heart-stopping fraction of a second when his famously sharp, incredibly perceptive eyes scanned the chaotic, boundless ocean of the crowd and suddenly locked directly onto the absolute pinnacle of European political authority. For the vast majority of ordinary, highly trained performers, suddenly realizing that the actual sitting head of a G7 nation is heavily scrutinizing your every single move would instantly trigger a massive, paralyzing spike of adrenaline, a rigidness in posture, or a desperate, entirely visible attempt to frantically overcompensate for the crushing, overwhelming pressure of the moment. But we are absolutely not talking about a standard pop star. We are talking about Kim Tae-young, a naturally gifted actor, an undisputed master of facial expressions, and a man whose entire physical being is intricately hardwired to effortlessly seduce the camera and completely command the emotional atmosphere of any room he steps into, regardless of its size or the monumental status of its occupants. When V's piercing, deeply soulful gaze swept over the sprawling stadium and recognized the French dignitaries, he did not freeze, he did not politely bow out of character, and he certainly did not look away in nervous, intimidated submission. Instead, he seemingly absorbed the immense, crushing weight of their towering presence and instantly transmuted it into a mesmerizing, dangerously alluring smirk that essentially turned the entire 80,000-seat stadium into his own personal, highly stylized movie set. You have to actively reflect on the fascinating, deeply poetic symmetry of this specific cultural collision to truly appreciate its legendary, history-making magnitude, especially when considering V's deeply documented, profound personal love for classic jazz, vintage aesthetics, and the romantic, artistic legacy of Paris itself. This is a man who casually spends his precious free time strolling through the romantic cobblestone streets of Montmartre, deeply admiring classical French architecture and listening to old vinyl records. For him to stand on that massive, blindingly lit Parisian stage, effectively becoming the ultimate, breathtaking bridge between the ancient, deeply respected traditions of European high art and the explosive, fiercely modern, unstoppable energy of global K-pop, is a cinematic triumph of unbelievable, genuinely staggering proportions. The First Lady, Brigitte Macron, who is widely celebrated for her sharp cultural awareness and deep intellectual appreciation of fine arts and contemporary youth movements, must have been utterly transfixed by the sheer, unadulterated gravity of his deep, velvety baritone voice echoing powerfully through the crisp night air.
When V performs, he doesn't merely sing the designated notes or hit the choreographed marks. He essentially bends the very fabric of time and space around his intoxicating persona, flawlessly transitioning from aggressive, fiercely intimidating glares during hard-hitting, bass-heavy tracks like Mic Drop or On, to delicate, impossibly fluid, and heartbreakingly vulnerable expressions in emotional, sweeping masterpieces like Singularity or Blue and Gray. In that exact split second of profound realization, his signature razor-sharp intensity sharpened even further, his eyes narrowing into that famous, fiercely alluring, almost predatory gaze that has practically brought millions of devoted fans to their knees across the entire globe, completely blurring the rigid, traditionally intimidating lines between political royalty and musical artistry. He essentially forced the most powerful, heavily guarded figures in the entire venue to submit entirely to his complex narrative and his unique, highly intoxicating emotional wavelength, holding their undivided attention with the quiet, terrifyingly beautiful confidence of an apex predator completely aware of its absolute dominance. What was genuinely going through his wildly creative, endlessly fascinating mind in that exact silent moment of supreme triumph? Was he quietly reflecting on the incredibly poignant, deeply emotional fact that he was once the group's hidden member, a young, anxious teenager from the rural farming town of Gochang who wasn't even allowed to appear in the group's initial debut vlogs, forced to sit alone in a cramped studio while his best friends introduced themselves to the world? The sheer emotional weight of his incredible, heavily documented journey from a self-doubting, passionately driven farm boy holding on to a desperate dream to a global cultural titan, casually mesmerizing the absolute highest echelon of the European elite in Paris, is a narrative so profoundly inspiring, so utterly unbelievable, that it feels entirely ripped straight from a highly dramatic, heavily awarded Hollywood screenplay. He flawlessly weaponized his breathtaking visual appeal and deeply resonant voice in front of the political elite, transforming his raw, bleeding emotion into a spectacular, multi-sensory visual feast that completely transcended the immense, historically stubborn barriers of the Korean language, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that pure, unadulterated artistic passion and supreme, effortless swagger are a universal dialect that even the most stoic, heavily guarded politicians simply cannot ignore or brush aside. Every single dramatic, heavily stylized hair flip, every subtle, teasing, dangerously slow lick of his lips, every impossibly smooth, calculated turn of his head was executed with a terrifying, absolute precision that screamed undeniable, absolute supremacy, effectively rendering the immense political power in the room entirely secondary to his staggering gravitational artistic pull. You could literally see the physical manifestation of his immense pride as a South Korean artist bleeding profusely through every single frame of his performance. He was silently, powerfully demanding the absolute highest level of respect, not just for himself as a globally recognized vocalist and visual center, but for his beloved country, his brothers fiercely battling alongside him on stage, and the millions of dedicated, fiercely loyal fans who had single-handedly elevated them to this completely unimaginable height of global influence.
Number 1. Jungkook, the Golden Maknae's absolute supremacy, a world-conquering roar. When you finally reach the absolute, undisputed summit of this legendary, history-making top list, you inevitably come face-to-face with the terrifying, unparalleled phenomenon that is Jungkook, the universally feared and adored Golden Maknae of BTS, whose reaction to discovering the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and First Lady Brigitte Macron vibing in the VIP section of his Paris concert was a magnificent, earth-shattering display of pure, unadulterated global supremacy. To truly, deeply understand the mind-bending cinematic scale of this exact moment, you have to mentally thrust yourself right into the very heart of the Stade de France, a colossal architectural titan that was physically trembling under the deafening, tear-soaked screams of 80,000 deeply passionate armies. The blinding, multicolored stage lasers were violently slicing through the thick, hazy Parisian night sky. The heavy, echoing bass of their record-breaking tracks was rattling the very steel foundations of the massive arena, and right there, perfectly positioned in the crosshairs of this staggering sensory overload, sat the absolute pinnacle of European political authority, actively witnessing the most formidable, historically significant display of South Korean soft power the world has ever seen. Now, deeply and vividly imagine being Jungkook in that fleeting, heart-stopping fraction of a second when his famously huge, incredibly perceptive doe eyes scanned the chaotic, boundless ocean of the crowd and suddenly locked directly onto the heavily guarded presidential box. For the vast majority of ordinary, highly trained performers, realizing that the actual sitting head of a G7 nation is heavily scrutinizing your every single move would instantly trigger a massive, paralyzing spike of adrenaline, a rigidness in posture, or a desperate, entirely visible attempt to frantically overcompensate for the crushing, overwhelming pressure of the moment. But we are absolutely not talking about a standard pop star. We are talking about a man who was literally raised by the music industry, a prodigy who debuted at the remarkably tender age of 15 and spent his entire adolescence meticulously forging himself into the ultimate, flawless weapon of mass entertainment. When Jungkook's piercing, deeply soulful gaze swept over the sprawling stadium and recognized the French dignitaries, he did not freeze, he did not politely bow out of character, and he certainly did not look away in nervous, intimidated submission. Instead, a brilliant, almost feral smirk slowly crept across his face, a terrifyingly beautiful expression of a young king who realizes he doesn't just belong in this impossibly grand setting, he completely and utterly owns it. You have to actively reflect on the fascinating, deeply emotional backstory of this specific cultural collision to truly appreciate its legendary, history-making magnitude. This is the exact same boy who was once so agonizingly shy that he would wait until all of his older members had fallen fast asleep just so he could sneak into the bathroom to take a shower without being seen. A kid who cried out of pure frustration when asked to sing in front of a small group of trainees. Fast forward to this breathtaking, surreal Parisian night, and that formerly timid boy from Busan is now a towering, unstoppable vocal powerhouse, casually staring down the president of the French Republic while executing intensely grueling, bone-snapping choreography without missing a single solitary breath. The First Lady Brigitte Macron, who is widely celebrated for her sharp cultural awareness and deep intellectual appreciation of contemporary youth movements, must have been utterly transfixed by the sheer, undeniable gravity of his crystal-clear, immensely powerful high notes echoing piercingly through the crisp night air. When Jungkook performs, he doesn't merely sing the designated notes or hit the choreographed marks. He physically attacks the stage with a relentless, insatiable hunger that is utterly terrifying to behold, flawlessly transitioning from aggressive, fiercely intimidating dance breaks and hard-hitting bass-heavy tracks like Idol or Mic Drop to delicate, impossibly fluid, and heartbreakingly vulnerable vocal acrobatics in emotional, sweeping masterpieces like Euphoria. In that exact split second of profound realization of who was watching him, his signature razor-sharp intensity skyrocketed to an entirely new, unimaginable stratosphere. He seemingly absorbed the immense, crushing weight of their towering presence and instantly transmuted it into a mesmerizing, dangerously alluring burst of kinetic energy, hitting his ad-libs with a fierce, soaring intensity that practically tore the roof off the stadium. He essentially forced the most powerful, heavily guarded figures in the entire venue to submit entirely to his staggering vocal range and his unique, highly intoxicating emotional wavelength, holding their undivided attention with the quiet,
terrifyingly beautiful confidence of an apex predator, completely aware of its absolute dominance. What was genuinely going through his wildly creative, endlessly fascinating mind in that exact silent moment of supreme triumph? Was he quietly reflecting on the incredibly poignant, deeply emotional fact that he literally grew up under the unforgiving microscope of the entire world, carrying the crushing, unimaginable expectations of his beloved country on his heavily tattooed shoulders? The sheer emotional weight of his incredible, heavily documented journey from a self-doubting, passionately driven teenager holding on to a desperate dream to a global cultural titan casually mesmerizing the absolute highest echelon of the European elite in Paris was a narrative so profoundly inspiring, so utterly unbelievable that it feels entirely ripped straight from a highly dramatic, heavily awarded Hollywood screenplay. He flawlessly weaponized his visual appeal, his fiercely toned physique, and his deeply resonant, angelic voice in front of the political elite, transforming his raw, bleeding emotion into a spectacular, multi-sensory visual feast that completely transcended the immense, historically stubborn barriers of the Korean language, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that pure, unadulterated artistic passion and supreme, effortless swagger are a universal dialect that even the most stoic, heavily guarded politician simply cannot ignore or brush aside. Every single dramatic, heavily stylized hair flip, every subtle teasing wink directed at the massive camera lenses, every impossibly smooth, calculated spin was executed with a terrifying, absolute precision that screamed undeniable, undisputed supremacy, effectively rendering the immense political power in the room entirely secondary to his staggering gravitational artistic pull. You could literally see the physical manifestation of his immense pride as a South Korean artist bleeding profusely through every single frame of his performance. He was silently, powerfully demanding the absolute highest level of respect, not just for himself as a globally recognized main vocalist and center, but for his beloved country, his older brothers fiercely battling alongside him on stage, who practically raised him, and the millions of dedicated, fiercely loyal fans who had single-handedly elevated them to this completely unimaginable height of influence. This wasn't just another regular, highly scheduled tour stop concert for Jungkook. This was a high-stakes, deeply emotional theatrical exhibition of survival, relentless dominance, and exquisite, breathtaking artistic evolution that boldly demanded to be permanently etched into the annals of history. The way he effortlessly, brilliantly balanced his fierce, explosive, aggressively commanding stage energy with deeply intimate, delicately vulnerable moments on that massive, intimidating platform was a definitive, undisputed masterclass in live entertainment, deeply and permanently reminding the entire watching world exactly why he is universally considered the absolute greatest, most captivating, and dangerous pop star of his generation.